Howdy y'all, it's September, well, almost September, but I figured it's a good time to go ahead and get it out of the way. We're gonna talk about what we're planting in September so we can hopefully get a harvest maybe around late October or mid-November. This could be our Thanksgiving harvest, you never know. So hopefully we're gonna plant in with the idea that the heat's gonna break this month. That's what we're gonna hope for. Usually for us, around mid-September, the heat does start to break. And it could break a little bit earlier, but it really starts to come down a little bit, which is going to be a welcome sight for the garden, that is. Not me personally, I like it hot. But we're going to try and get some of these more tender vegetables ready. And we're also going to be starting to plant for the greenhouse. Not plant in the greenhouse, but start seeds for the greenhouse. Because the greenhouse is still moving north of 100 degrees every day. But the more closer we get and the lower the sun gets, it is starting to cool down. So we're gonna make our plantings accordingly and really see if we can't get a good head start, because our first frost, I believe, is supposed to be in the first week of November. So we still have a good 2 months. And really for these vegetables, it's gonna be prime growing season for these vegetables. So we really wanna get them going and get them nice and strong so when it cools off, they can take off. Those of you who are new to the channel, just to recap briefly what we've already got going is we've got a bed of broccoli, we've got a bed in the back of cabbage, we've got a bed behind this one, which is Brussels sprouts, and then we've got a bed of rutabaga over here going. So that's pretty much what we've got for fall going right now. So we've got to figure out our space requirements and really hone in on our plan a little bit. I've had a little bit of a hiccup this year, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but this second tomato bed is going to do its thing. We'll see what happens. And then over here, we have the wild garden. And so we still have our pepper bed going, and I don't really plan to let that up too much. I want to keep it going as long as possible, especially now that the heat's going to start breaking. But everything else is basically ready to be replanted over here. So we've got 4 beds over here, and they need to be transferred over. Some of them have been resting. Some of them have had crop failures. You know, my son's carrot bed, for instance, it didn't really do good because we just got so hot. And we've had a really hot summer. It's been consistently in the mid 90s for multiple days in a row, longer than I can remember. So, you know, it's something we have to deal with, but you know, replanting it's not a big deal. It is what it is. So we'll get this veggie washing station, and it's basically going to be a seed starting station here coming up. So what we're going to do is we're going to direct sow, and I'm going to direct sow carrots, parsnips, and collards all at the same time. And it's probably going to be tomorrow. So the heat should be starting to pass by then. So then we can kind of go on to the next stage. And you know, once we get past a good heat wave, then we can come out and go. So we're going to let this last 90+ degree day go, at least for the foreseeable future. I'm sure it's going to get warm again, but it'll allow us to keep the soil wet. So we're going to direct sow those right in the garden. And we're probably going to do a fair amount of carrots. They don't necessarily, I don't plan for them to be harvested this year. They could be early spring harvest, but we welcome that because they're already going to be ready to go. We won't have to replant them or anything like that. And what we've learned is when we plant our carrots when it's warmer, we get a much faster germination rate. I mean, I'm talking, you know, sometimes it can be 10 days, 20 days for them to germinate. When we do it this time of year, we get like a 3 to 4 day germination. So especially when we start getting the nights to cool down a little bit, that's when it can pick up. So we really want to take advantage of that and get those things going right now. So like I said, probably tomorrow or the next day, we'll go out and we'll do collards, parsnips, carrots, and daikon radishes too, because I'm going to use those to till the bed that's compacted, at least start on it. Well, next week, what I'll do is I'm going to come out here, and I think what I'm going to do is trim all of this up so there's a nice row going straight down, and I'm gonna put kale seeds in here. I'm just gonna go ahead and direct sow them and get it over with. This tomato plant right here is producing, but it's just gotten ravaged. So we're just gonna go ahead and eliminate it. And I think what I'm gonna do with this bed is just hodgepodge it with different, you know, stuff that we can add to it and just kind of fill it in as needed as these tomatoes finish up. They've been taking a beating from the heat, and I mean, they look good. You know, there's no issues on the tomatoes, but they're not producing tomatoes themselves because of the heat. So as soon as it cools down, we'll start getting more tomatoes, and we'll do that. Now, if we don't, because of the time of year, we're gonna go ahead and cut them and remove them. Now that's a big part of this time of year, is just cutting it, removing it, getting it out of there. If it's not doing good, you still have time to plant. Go ahead and just bite the bullet and get it done. It does hurt and it is painful, but you do get used to it, and it's for the better good, because I'm growing my food to feed my family and to feed myself. So there is that. You know, I don't just grow just to look at it. And if you are falling in line with that, then sometimes you just got to bite the bullet and pull up the stuff that's not good and get something good in the ground. I've got a bunch of containers spread around my garden, and I haven't, like, this one had squash in it and I had never replanted it, which I don't know, it just kind of slipped my mind. Something about this greenhouse in the summertime, it just kind of, I don't know. I feel like it just needs to rest and go away. So we're gonna plant in there, and the pots that are randomly throughout my garden, I think what we'll do is we're either gonna put lettuce in them or cabbages. Probably lettuce, because we seem to have a full bed of cabbage. We'll see how much is gonna be really take off after this heat passes. But that's something that we are going to start, and that's gonna be, I might start them in deep shade, the seeds in deep shade after this heat goes, but if not, then I'm gonna direct sow in the middle of September. So this is like the last call for that. So as a matter of fact, for me, it's the first and last call for lettuce. So it's like I got a real short window. I can hopefully get it going, and that's why I'd really like to start the seeds, so I can go ahead and get it in the ground and get it going. But I can't start it in the sun because it's gonna be very bright and hot, and then I've had them bolt like immediately. There's nothing more disheartening than coming out and seeing a lettuce plant that's this big that's bolted right away. So we're gonna try not to do that. And what I'm probably gonna do is do like I did my mustard. I've got a couple reserves back here I'll show you. Now they've been growing for about a month and a half, and then we've had this consistent heat. And so I keep them back here on this table, and they've actually done fairly well. So they've been flooded a few times and we've had some losses, but for the most part, I mean, what we have left the seeds didn't get washed out is doing just fine in this heat, which tells me that this is a really good spot, because it does get a little dapple of sunlight throughout the day, and then we can get it back in there, put the seeds out here, let them start growing, and then they'll take over. So we won't keep them there long, and I'm not gonna start them in big cells either. I'm probably gonna do one of the 72 trays that I have and just get them, as many of those going as I possibly can. So when they start to fill, because I'll fill those cells quicker, and then I'll give them a shot of fertilizer, let them take off for a little bit, and then put them in. And with the temperatures the way they are, they should germinate pretty quick. And so that's something that I've learned this year, is when you germinate stuff in warmer temperatures, it germinates faster, which in turn means that I get faster growth and stronger plants sooner, but I have to manage the heat. So that's why the lettuce has really got to be timed out just right. So that leaves us at the middle of September, and at the same time, roughly either that week or maybe the week after, probably a couple days after the beginning of the week, which I know is getting like real precise, but that's kind of how I have to do it. Our spinach is going to go in. So our plan is to take our whole pepper bed, and then we're going to start clearing it out piece by piece by piece. And as we see things that need to come out, the spinach seeds will go in. And now we've got a heat tolerant variety that will start first, and then we have just a normal variety that will start second. And so we'll fill in the gaps around probably the outside of the bed. So that bed is pretty compacted still. It was the one that we did the sweet potatoes in last year that kind of failed. But I think we can put some topsoil down, or some compost, or a combination of both. we'll direct seed directly into that, and then we'll let those grow from there. And then as plants kind of die off or wither away or stop producing, stuff like that, then we can keep adding, because they'll continue to germinate up to about 40 degrees. So we still have a lot of time before our days are in 40 degrees consistently, if they even get to 40 degrees consistently. I'm thinking that I can start my spinach probably all the way up until the middle of October. We'll be pushing it. So I'll have like a solid month of starting spinach. So I can kind of work my way through. Now it could get a little difficult, but that's where adding like a frost protection or something like that can really help out and get those plants off and going. So we're gonna kind of work on that, but around the middle of September, we'll start our spinach seeds. And like I said, I may, as a matter of fact, now that I'm thinking about it, doing like regular 6-packs, plant those in, plant them in 6-packs as well, and just kind of have them on reserve in the shade, because spinach can be really easy to bolt as well. And it doesn't just bolt by the temperature, it also bolts by the amount of sunlight that it gets. So the length of the days. So I've got to really look and see how long the day length is and make sure that we've kind of hit that point. And this was news to me. I figured this out a couple years ago. But once that day, the length of the day flops and we're below the threshold, which I can't remember off the top of my head, that's when we're definitely going to put them in the ground and have them growing. But we're losing daylight faster now. So we're losing roughly about a minute a day. So that's 7 minutes a week, 28 minutes a month. So it can kind of add up, and it will accelerate up until the solstice. And in my area, spinach can really grow. And if we have a warm winter, like we've known to have, we could even have it harvest all through winter. So we're gonna try and keep that going. And we're gonna do, hopefully my plan is to do a full 4x8 bed of spinach. And also in the big pots that I have, what I'll probably do is put lettuce in the middle and then spinach on the outside of it. So we'll have the, it'll kind of be a little pleasing to the eye, but it'll also be able to maximize those big pots. So, the pot in front of the greenhouse, I can probably get 4 heads of lettuce and 8 spinach plants roughly. So it'll make it a little bit of a pain to harvest, but I can go around and just kind of work around that and it'll be fine. So we're gonna try and grow as much spinach as we can. I really wanna try and get a handle on it of how much I need to grow. So that's something I really wanna focus on this year. At the same time, the last planting that we'll do in our garden will be probably this front row here. And we'll probably end up putting radishes in just one row. Typically I've done like half a bed of them, but we don't really want to grow as many. So we'll go ahead and get those in the ground when we can, and just kind of clear out these plants and just kind of finish up the year. And that's going to be a quick crop. A month later, roughly, we'll be able to harvest them, and that row can go to sleep. The kale, it'll stay in there, but for the most part, what we want to do is we really want to time these things out and give these beds time to rest for the spring. And you have to remember, our spring's planting will start, technically we'll start in January planting some stuff, but really in February it starts kicking off pretty hard with our cabbages and our second broccoli plantings and stuff like that. So we want to give these beds time to rest in between, and that's really what my goal is this year. So I'm trying to time it all out so I get my harvest, I get it out. Hopefully around Christmas time, we can get most of the beds empty. We can put them to bed. We can mulch them heavy and do all that stuff, and then come back and then revitalize that soil and give it a good month or two to really rest and recover from this hard season that it's had. Plus with the heat and everything, it's sucked a lot of nutrients out, and we're pumping them in as fast as we can. But then we've got all these beautiful plants back here that are just sucking it out as fast as it can too. So it's a vicious cycle. And so with the radishes, that's going to leave us into starting to plant for our greenhouse. And that's the timing is a little bit different. So we'll start with that. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start a whole new video series about that, focusing on planting for the greenhouse when it's time, because it gets confusing trying to do out here and in there. because you have to think, like right now, I'm standing outside, it's 83, 85 degrees right now. And in the greenhouse, it's probably 97-ish, 98. So we still are a ways off before we can plant in there. And my plan is to plant things that are a little bit more delicate to the frost in there, because I figured out how to keep the temperature up at night. And then we can try and get some of these more delicate plants growing. So what I'm gonna do is the next video is gonna be about what we're harvesting for this month, because I do want to start that, because as we get into the, you know, the summer is pretty easy. Tomatoes, squash, cucumbers, beans, blah, 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 whatever, whatever. But as we get into these colder months and these transitional periods, our harvests change. So what I want to do is I'm going to start throwing in, along with this series, is like what we're harvesting for the month. So we're going to do a separate video about that. And then I'll also come in and I'll give you the greenhouse one at the same time. And so that's going to make a big difference, because hopefully if you have a greenhouse or you're interested in getting one, this can kind of help you at least see how I plan my garden and how I plan to manage my greenhouse, because I had some windfalls and some, you know, some failures in the greenhouse this year, as I have every year since I've had it. But it is what it is. So we'll get that started and we'll get it going, but it's going to be delayed, and then we have to fight the sun and the angle of it at the same time. So it gets really complicated, but I got you guys. So make sure you tune in for that. So the next video will more than likely be what we're harvesting, and then what we're growing in our greenhouse, or starting for our greenhouse and planting, because as the season dies down, all of this garden all over dies down. We're going to be transitioning into growing heavily in the greenhouse. And we're also going to be adding some garden beds this year. I've made my mind up, I'm going to do it. So we're going to add some garden beds so we can continue to grow in this pattern. Just want to take a second and tell you what my issue has been. And since I switched more over to monocropping this year, each garden bed, then it's made it a little bit more difficult to plan. And what I've realized is, as I monocrop, I need to have my different beds so I can have them easily rotatable and plantable. And I think adding a garden bed in, and there's also some things that we want to grow more of this year and next year. So adding a garden bed or two in is really going to help alleviate that pressure, and we'll be able to manage it a little bit better. So it's one of the few times that I feel like adding garden space is actually going to help me manage my garden better. Because a lot of times I'm under the stance of, like, if you have a really big garden and you're not used to it, it can be very overwhelming and a lot of work. But at the same time, weeding, fertilizing, and planting is a lot of work physically, but mentally, planting and rotating and companion crops and cover crops and all these things can be very mentally taxing. And I feel like it's going to alleviate that pressure from me. And so I feel like adding a garden bed at the same time is going to help me mentally, and I'm willing to take on the physical burden of it. So we're going to cross that bridge very soon. And this is on a slope, so I've also got to figure out how to build a raised bed on a slope. So we're going to be figuring that out together.